Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by John Fisher. John is a psychologist and coach who has spent the last 25 years working in change management, personal development, and individual coaching. He has a unique blend of experience working across a wide range of sectors and small, mid-size, and multinational corporations. John used his experience working as a counselor to develop a change curve that has inspired thousands of people worldwide, helping them make both organizational and personal changes. He firmly believes organizations don't change, people do. And that is what we talk about in the episode today. We get really deep into his change curve and the power that it can have, one, just to understanding what is going on within us as we go through changes, big and small. Two, what is going through the heads and bodies of the people around us as we are leading them through change. And also we talk about the keys to sort of hacking the curve, if you will, to making sure that people don't spend a lot of time in the negative spaces, that they can just skim through those as fast as possible. And there are some tips that John offers to help people do that. Really fascinating conversation, definitely applicable to everybody every day as we're faced with different changes that we have to make. I got a lot out of this personally. I think you will too. I hope you enjoy it. Here is John Fisher. John, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you on. I can't remember, and I didn't go back to check, but I can't remember if your name has come up on the show or just come up in conversation. But I have had a guest on, Stephanie Waite, who is an expert and consultant in change management and learning design. And she has definitely mentioned the Fisher change curve to me before. And when your team reached out, and I saw the Fisher change curve, I said, wait a minute, that looks really familiar. And sure enough, you are the one. And so I'm excited to have you on today and kind of talk through this, because there's nothing constant in life except change, and we all hate it. So isn't that a conundrum?
Very much so.
So all that to say, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here as well. And I'll have to thank Stephanie at some stage for the plug.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning if we can. What is the Fisher change curve, and how did it come to be?
Well, the Fisher change curve is really a way of thinking about how we go through change and the actual impact of that change journey on our sense of identity, our sense of who we are and what we are, really. And it came about some 20 odd years ago, 25 years ago, actually, I think this year, when I was doing volunteer counselling for an alcohol awareness organisation as a volunteer. And I found a lot of people would come for a session, have a really good session, do some really good work, and then never come back. Although they're booking for the following week and just wouldn't turn up. And when I talked around the rest of the volunteers, because initially I just blamed myself for being rubbish at this, but all of the other volunteers said, yep, we get that regularly. It happens all the time. So I started thinking about why and what was it about the situation that really made people make some movements, make some commitments, and then not follow through and just not turn up again. And I started recognizing that really it's about their identity. It's one of the problems with alcohol issues is people tend to have to change their whole circle of friends, change their lifestyle, change everything they do. That then set me off thinking about, so what's happening is in the cold light of day, people realize it's a massive change with a lot of implications, are scared by the thought of that change, and so resist it. and just it's easier to carry on than it is to hold the ugly mirror up to themselves and recognize that they are part of the problem until they choose to be the solution.
Yeah. Well, I think anyone listening can recognize that pattern either in themselves, something that they've tried to change, or in the people around them, right? We all know people who have bad habits and commit to wanting to change those habits, and they just don't. It's why gyms are flooded in January, and by the end of February, they're back to normal capacity again.
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's wider. One of the things that has happened is it just seems to have touched a popular nerve and hit the zeitgeist. And an American author has written a book, Rebecca Colson, has written a book about people going through job changes or moving into employment, and used the curve as the framing device for her exploration. So it's sort of not just applicable in one or two areas, but widely applicable across every interaction that we have potentially. And I know a relocation agency, they use the curve to help families who are moving with one person's job to a different country.
Oh, interesting.
And help them sort of settle in.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So very much so. It's a health organisation or a weight loss organisation here in the UK a couple of years ago also used the curve as part of their behavioural change programme to help people understand some of the emotional journey as they go through losing weight. And that was an integral part of their change program.
Yeah. So can you walk through what the curve is and the steps along the way? And for anyone who's listening, I know that this is going to be maybe a little bit difficult to visualize. If you go to the show notes and click on the link down there, we have a link to what this change curve looks like, to an actual graphic that you can look at. And I know most people listen to podcasts while they're driving or walking or something like that. So nobody hurt themselves here. Mm-hmm. But it would be, at this point, it might be good to stop and pull this up and look at it as John is kind of talking about what this is. So at least everybody knows the framework of it, because there are a few steps along the way.
There are, and I'll try and keep it fairly top level about the steps and go a little bit more generically than specifically for those who are in a place where it's not safe to have a look at the curve. So start off in that stage of want something to change, something's changing. We're in that sort of grey area of is it going to, isn't it going to, what's the point? To then move in, once we know changes is happening, we then go into a sort of state around, great, it's happening, let's look at this, let's see. Maybe I'm bored with what's happening. Maybe I'm not comfortable. I'm in a painful place, and I want something to be different. But then once we sort of get through that initial, could this be good? Let's see what it's like. We move into a stage around being anxious, being threatened as two of the next stages, which I define as sort of the size and scale and scope of the change. So the anxiety is really, we think it'd only be a small change. We don't think there's going to be too much. If it then becomes apparent it's a bigger change than we initially thought, or there's a bigger impact, we move into the threat type, where we feel threatened by our sense of who we are and what we are. And as we go through finding out more about the change, then we go further down in internalizing that change and starting to potentially blame ourselves for not seeing the change sooner, not adopting it sooner, not adapting quicker to it. And just because human nature, we then extrapolate that feeling and we apply it to all walks of life. I didn't see this change coming. Does that mean that I'm not very good at seeing change? Am I not as resilient as I thought? And does that mean I'm a bad leader, where leaders sometimes are placed in positions? Does that then mean I'm not leading my team well? I'm not communicating well with them? That leads us into a sort of fugue-like state, or a state where we are confused, we don't know what to do, we don't trust our coping mechanisms, we can't quite see where the future's going, what the future holds for us, and we don't quite know how to work. And this could be lack of communication from the organisation. It could be just we don't know what we don't know. And I added, going down that sort of slope, a little thing around anger. And the tendency at the start of the slope, where we're moving from that anxiety into threat, is that we blame other people and we are angry at others for forcing us to change when there was nothing wrong with where we were in the first place. But as we go further through and we start blaming ourselves, the anger turns round and becomes angry at ourselves, and we internalize that anger that just makes it so much worse. Now, there's a couple of ways off the curb apart from the healthy way, one of which potentially is healthy, but one is just denial, where we do nothing, stick our head in the sand, and just hope it'll go away.
Yeah. This is where somebody comes in and goes, hey, this is the change we're going to make. And you go, great. And then you walk back to your office and you don't do anything about it. You just totally ignore it. Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah, definitely. The other one I sort of call I'm off. And that's where we make a conscious decision that the change isn't right for us. The change doesn't meet or match our values. So rather than compromise who we are, we go and look for another job, or we get out of a toxic environment. If the organisation, and we're lucky, we get out, or we do go into the fight or flight response, where we flee and just go back to doing the bare minimum, the absenteeism, presenteeism philosophy. So we stay in the organisation, but we just don't do a lot and hope that everything settles down once we've got through it. So that's the unhealthy. The healthier side is we make that conscious decision and go rather than mentally go. And when we come to that sort of point at the bottom with the confusion, we can flip one of two ways. We can either, a word I've used is hostility. We can either fight like mad to prove that people are idiots for making us change and continue using the old system, continue doing everything the old way, and expecting others to realise as well, see the light, and go back to what we were doing. And we exert a lot of energy, and at an extreme even sabotage the way of the world now, and just refuse to accept that change. Or we start sort of turning that corner, getting a flash of insight, hitting rock bottom, whichever metaphor we want to use, and start trying to change bits and pieces, looking at ways to play with the change, looking at the ways to integrate it. Maybe the organisation's had a meeting where everybody gets to clear the air or gets to feel engaged and help be part of how do we make the change real? How do we make it work from where we are? As we then go forwards to accepting the change and living with the change, being part of that change in a successful, less stressful way.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And as I said in the beginning, there's a lot to that. So I hope people do stop and open this up and kind of look at this. Let's break some of this down because I got a lot of questions. Asking for a friend here. So this starts with this sense of anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think this was a question I was going to ask was,
Mm.
what happens before change? Like, we recognize a change needs to happen. Does this curve apply just once we've decided what the change is going to be, or does it apply to this sense of, oh, maybe something's wrong? And what I just heard you say is the first step in this, in any change, is just acknowledging something's wrong here. And that comes with this anxiety or discomfort, or like something's not working. And just that recognition that, like, oh man, this thing that we were doing or this plan that we had is not going to be the plan that's going to work on a go forward basis. Is that fair? Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, it is a fair. And one of the things I do when I run workshops, I've done sort of interactive sessions here, is I use a Boston box, a 4-box model, with one axis being this is going to work out badly for me against this is going to work out well for me. And then the other axis is I've been here before, or this is totally new territory that I haven't a clue what's going on. And then depending on which of those 4 boxes you fall will depend really on how you will start interacting with that change. So if it's worked out badly, you've been here before, it's worked out badly, you're more likely to go into hostility, you're more likely to sabotage and resist that change with all your might. If you've been here before and it's worked well, then potentially you'll be a champion, you'll fight for it. And it's the other two where you don't quite know what's going to happen. You think it might be okay, that might lead to a little bit of the anxiety, and then working across rather than down the curve. Or if you've not been here before, but you think it's going to be bad, that leads to a bigger threat, and the implications there become more negative for you as you go down. So I map that onto that sort of journey as well to help change agents, leaders, individuals plot out how they can cope and make sense of that change a bit more effectively to lower the dip. And it's fair to say we're going through change curves all the time. In some ways, we're both going through a little bit of the change curve around this interview, this podcast, around how will it work, how will it go, what are the implications if it goes well, badly, indifferently. And there are some of those feelings before we sit down. So some people, as you know, have a little pre-meeting first just to put the person at ease. And I liken that to when you go for a job interview, whoever collects you from the reception will usually make small talk on the way to the interview to put you at ease, to get you comfortable, so you get the best candidate showing up in the best way, and the candidate gets the chance to be more relaxed and sell themselves in the most effective way.
So it makes sense to me that, okay, there's this anxiety, something needs to change. Now here's what we're going to do. I don't like my belly. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm drinking too much. I'm going to stop. This tech system at work isn't working. We're going to change it. All right, we've made this decision. We feel like we know what needs to happen. We feel good about it. We have a plan in place. And then that's the kind of first peak. And then the rubber meets the road and we actually have to put in the work. And so it makes sense to me that, like, at that point we start to dip again, because now comes the fear. All of a sudden the thing shows up. You're in the middle of that first workout, or you walk into the gym for the first time and you realize, I don't know what any of this equipment is. I don't know how to use this. I'm a fish out of water here. I'm out of my comfort zone. There's that fear.
Yep.
We feel a little threatened. Other people are really fit. We feel guilty. Why didn't I do this earlier? People do this with savings, right? If you haven't saved and now suddenly you're going to start a savings plan. Well, how do I save? Where do I put my money?
Yeah.
Or other people are better than me. I'm embarrassed that I didn't do this earlier. And then that leads into depression. So that makes total sense that you would ride that down as you really are faced with the real world action of change.
Yeah. And I suppose in many ways, a friend of mine talks about a cliff face, and he talks when he does his work, and he works with the fire and police services and some of those first line responders. And you so nicely there just articulated what could happen going down that cliff face and falling through the trap door in almost that catastrophizing and that massive implication that is one of the other, I suppose, key things around the curving. Well, it's shown linearly because that's a really convenient way to show it and to have it working. It's not necessarily totally linear. You can drop immediately, as you just did there, into that confusion area, into that what do I do, where you potentially turn around and walk out. It's not quite linear, and it's shown as stages, but stages don't have to be gone through. You can jump between them, as you so nicely did. I think one of the key things, though, you said there was you have a plan. Sometimes we start the change without a plan. So one of the other models I overlay is, I just call it the past, present and future model, because it's about closing the past down, getting closure, celebrating what worked well, celebrating what was successful about the old way of working, but then giving the argument for change and giving the burning platform that some of the change agents talk about. But what you've then got to do is create that future vision and understand exactly what you'll be doing, saying, what's the weight you'll be down to, what will you be looking like, then how ripped will you be, or are you just doing it for a six-pack or a four-pack or whatever it is, that then allows you to get the route map and the plan to take you from where you are to where you want to be. And that then helps you be more effective in the change. So going back to your versions and the earlier one about you sign up for the gym as New Year's resolution, you walk into the gym, you've usually got this vague concept of, I want to get fit or I want to lose weight, that's relatively meaningless and almost impossible to achieve because you set no goal, no target, and you don't quite understand what the new version of you will be like and how will you manage the time once you're back at work again, full time into work, everything's going right or wrong. How do you fit that? And without that plan, then it does get harder to manage the change.
Yeah. So that was going to be my question was, what are some strategies that people can employ in the beginning to make that dip more shallow? So having a plan is the first one, and having a clear vision for the outcome would be a second one. Any other tips for shallowing that curve?
I think I call it managing the horizon. So you've got your long-term plan. What are your intermediate steps? So you've got the 5-year goal, the 1-year goal. What steps are in between so you can get those measures of success along the way to give you the confidence, to give you that boost? Low-hanging fruit, regularly called. From a organizational perspective and a leader perspective, then one of the key ones is engaging the team, having those open conversations. And if it can't be an open conversation, saying it cannot be too open, you can't disclose too much for whatever reasons, confidentiality, fast-moving change, but allowing people to talk about their perception of the change, having them share where they think the current is wrong, and then what could they do about that. So those free-form discussions on one-on-one or one with the group, that just allows everybody to get it off their chest, to vent, and then focus on, so what can we do? How can we make this change work to get them to own it?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like you're almost heading off the fear, guilt, and depression up front. Like hey, let's get all that, like, let's anticipate what fear, guilt, and depression may surface, and then, and threats too, where we feel threatened. Let's get all that out. And then by naming it and having a plan for it and recognizing it and talking through it, we're actually minimizing it. I had another guest on a couple of years ago talking about negotiations, and he was saying that most people, when you enter into some kind of negotiation or difficult conversation, you don't want the person to talk about how bad they're feeling because you don't want them to ruminate on it, but actually getting people to articulate their negative emotions actually lowers their negative emotions.
Totally.
Which is the flip to positive emotions. If you are talking about your positive emotions, it actually increases your positive emotions. If you talk through your negative emotions, it actually decreases your negative emotions. So that's kind of what I hear you saying here, is like using that principle up front to combat that stuff.
I suppose anybody who works in some sort of customer service, customer focused area knows you can't talk to somebody who's venting. You've got to wait till they run out of steam and stop, because then they can listen.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the fight or flight response. Once the adrenaline gets up, you stop listening, because that's a genetically learned behavior to protect you and to save you. So you focus on whatever's wrong. Your vision goes really pinpoint. Your hearing goes, and all these sorts. So you've got to wait till they're finished, and then they can start. So let them get it off the chest first, and you will always be more successful.
Yeah. And so we hit this bottom and we start coming back up again, and, kind of gradual acceptance is the next piece of this. It's one piece on the curve, but I imagine this could be the longest piece, right? Where this is where you're working through it. You're letting go of the depression. You're letting go of the self-talk. You're making the changes. Like this could be quick, or this could be a year or 2 years of this gradual acceptance until this thing becomes part of your identity, part of your habits and routines. But to me, that's just like flipping from negative energy to more positive, productive energy. Okay, I've accepted that I feel this way, and I've finally fully accepted this change and the work it's going to take, and now we're doing that work and moving in that
Very
direction.
much so.
Okay.
George Kelly, an American psychologist from the middle years of the last century, talked about personal construct theory, and he talked about we're all scientists constantly experimenting, trying things out to see if they work. And that, for me, is a nice sort of way of thinking about that gradual acceptance. We try things. If it works, we keep on doing them. If it doesn't work, we maybe just look at adapting it to get it to work, or ditching it and making a slightly different choice, so we can then move forwards in a way that's congruent with who we are and helps us feel in control. Because a lot of people feel out of control during change, and so playing that engagement is one way of giving them some control.
Yeah.
And I think you've hit on something which is why I think a lot of organizational change fails. And John Cotter talked about 80% of organizational change fails. And I think one of the reasons it's failed is because people underestimate that gradual acceptance time frame. As you say, it can be years. And I think some organizations don't give it enough time to embed, don't give it enough time to get the tipping point of people to make the change now common standard, common practice.
Yeah.
So change horses midstream, do something else where you end up in that constant, a little bit of change here. Oh, we've not done this, let's change there. Or the organizations don't see the change happening fast enough. So they want a quick hit rather than taking the time, so they look for a quick fix. And I think those two are two of the key reasons change doesn't work in some organizations.
Are you saying that people are impatient and want to take shortcuts?
Never.
No, can't be. Can't be. This is fantastic. So, okay. So we've kind of walked through this now again, gotten to, final eventually move from gradual acceptance to acceptance. Now this is just the way things are. And now we're looking at how do we tweak it and change it again. Let's talk about these off ramps, if we could. The first one being denial. So this is in the beginning of a change where we have that anxiety, something's not working. We think through, well, this isn't working, but it's fine. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. It's, it's not that bad. I can kind of accept this. Like somebody comes in and says, hey, we need to change this. And you're like, nah, I can live with this. I know that's a little painful, but I can live with it. It's that type of sentiment, correct?
Yeah. It's the dog sitting in, certainly the old country songs, the dog sitting on the porch on a nail that can't be bothered moving and will just whinge about the bit of pain because it's too much effort to move.
Yeah. What have you found is the best way to get people through denial? Because there's kind of, to me, there seems to be two kinds of denial. There's aware denial and there's unaware denial. Yeah. And there's like, hey, I know this hurts, but it's too scary to think about what change would look like. I do sales in my job, and I had talked to this one gentleman for 6 or 7 years. And every single year he was unhappy with the partner he was working with. And we talked about all these great things he could do. And he just wouldn't change. And finally, I just asked him, like, it's been 7 years. Like, what's going on here? And he said, well, it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And he knew there was a problem and he just wouldn't do anything about it. The other type, though, is I have worked in places before where, one job in particular, where I knew it didn't quite feel right, but I was like, I can make this work. I'm going to figure this out. And it wasn't until I sort of was forced out of that environment that I realized really the full burden of the situation I was in and the toll that it had taken on me. And I saw this happen with my father-in-law. His business was bought. He had been running this department. Suddenly, these other people came in, totally changed how he's running the department. He was trying to make it work. He was trying to do his best, but we could all see, but he couldn't see the mental toll it was taking on him to be in that environment every day. And then when he finally got out, all of a sudden that weight was lifted. And he was like, wow, I didn't even realize quite how bad it was while we were in it. So all that to say, there's these kind of two kinds of denial. What are the best practices from your perspective in getting people off that hump?
Yeah. And I think your father-in-law's experience himself in many ways is going down that slope of the curve to go down to the confusion. And in the middle of it, it's very hard to see what's going on outside until you get the insight area and you suddenly realize. I think there's 2 or 3 things here that's partly around that engagement. There's a little bit around George Kelly, and you did the same thing. Kelly says, if you want to know what somebody's thinking, ask them, they might tell you. And part of it is asking them, it's that engagement. It's also 2 of the best persuaders, shall we say, for me, is Wifm, WIIFM, what's in it for me, but for those of the listeners who haven't come across it before. So identify what will they get out of the change, or get them to identify it, identify what it means for them. So what will they lose that's the pain, what will they get that's the positive. I also then turned that around based on some work by a guy called Finch Udy, who not only looks at the pros and cons of change, but the pros and cons of staying as they are. And if somebody perceives they're going to lose more than they're going to gain, they won't change and they'll resist that change. So it's identifying some of those drivers for and against change to then help you work with the individuals, the teams, to look at how can you overcome them, where can people get the different buzz from. And if people are, because that for me is the second of the two fundamental persuaders. Give them a reason for that change. Explain why you can't carry on with business as usual and you need to change. And again, going back, if you can engage and involve with them. And the other thing I've learned through change is you can never over-communicate during times of change. No matter how much you communicate, it won't be enough. But help them understand what they'll gain, let them tell you what they'll gain, and manage out what they'll lose and find alternatives to give them whatever it is they'll lose.
Yeah, I heard once somebody say that change, when you're changing as a team, it's like driving in a car with the windows blocked out. And you're navigating the car and you're the only one who can see where you're going and how far you've been. And so you have to be constantly communicating to everybody, hey, we're here now.
Yeah.
Here's where we're going. Now we're here and here's where we're going. It's going to take this long. You're going to feel some bumps. It's going to be like, you have to be narrating the change as it's happening. And here's where we're going to go. And once we get out of this car, it's going to be great. It's going to be beautiful. Here's where we are in the process now. And you have to be narrating that the whole time.
Definitely.
I thought that was a good analogy.
And I think the analogy for me is I've done some coach trips in Europe and gone on coach holidays around various countries and places. And you usually have a guide that's there with the driver, and they're constantly talking to you. You look out the left window, look out the right window. We've got X amount of time for our next stop. And yeah, lovely analogy.
Yeah, that's probably, I like your analogy even better. I'm going to use that one.
You can have it, don't worry.
Thank you. This is what is so nice about you is you've made all of this public domain. Yeah. So, which is why there are more books and it's been able to catch in the zeitgeist.
Totally. It's useful.
All right. So,
and I was just going to say, George Miller, another mid-century psychologist from the US, talked about giving psychology away. And that had a profound impact really on me as a concept, because it's like that knowledge is power. It's only power if people know you've got the knowledge. And if you keep something hidden, then it's no use. It's just got a very small footprint, whereas if it's free, then it's helped thousands of people all around the world as this, which is far better for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that. Thank you for doing it.
Well, thank you.
So, all right. So we've hit denial. We got 2 more stops on the 2 more ejection seats. So we slide down this car. Okay. So we get through denial. We know we're going to make change. And then all of a sudden the rubber hits the road and we get afraid. We feel threatened. We feel guilty. And then we get to this point where we're disillusioned, right? Mm-hmm. And you said it in the beginning. This is where sometimes people can say, you know what? I've had a little bit of experience with this change and it doesn't align with my values. Yeah. And I'm going to choose positively to step off. It also seems like there's a little bit of opportunity for denial here, where somebody kind of gets to the bottom of this and they go, this isn't really me. And it's like, well, that's because we're trying to improve you. Yeah. And so that's why you're on this change curve in the first place. So how much of this is positive? Hey, this isn't for me because of my values and I've defined those values. It seems like more of it would be you get to the bottom and it's almost a different form of denial where they're like, you know what, this is just too much. I'm disillusioned by this. It's too hard. I'm not willing to put the effort in and I want to pull the ripcord.
Definitely. And really good question. And the first time I've ever been asked that in 25 years. So,
there you go.
Excellent. Yeah. Well pleased. I think if you look on the curve and when your listeners see the curve, then the disillusionment is really close to the denial, and the denial stage is almost stood on top of the head of the disillusionment stage. So very short leap up into denial, almost a step up as it were. So I think you're right in that it's one of those that can be a force for good or bad, depending on us. And
I think the key is the thing I wanted to point out is it's really easy to deceive ourselves.
Yeah, totally.
Amidst change, that we're going to step off because this is better for us.
Yeah.
But that's just another form of denial.
Yeah, it is totally. Yeah. And I suppose linking that back into, if you're a change agent, then part of your role is to hold that mirror back up to people and to challenge that perception, to get them to own and to be committed rather than compliant with the change. Because one of the dangers, if we don't manage change too effectively, is people become compliant, they pay it lip service and do nothing then in, as we talked about earlier on. So, and it depends on the individual, and it depends in many ways on the individual's, I will say personality, but on some of their behaviours and some of their beliefs. And if we go back to, this is going to be bad for me, they're more likely to drop into denial rather than the more positive, I'm going to take ownership because I know I can get something better and move somewhere better. And maybe a personal example here. I worked for an organisation. There was a new startup, but it was an old company's department that had been moved into a new startup company, and the asset management company that owned it put the hierarchy in, and the organisation I worked for put the bodies in, and really sold it well. They really managed the initial change process really, really well. But what then happened is one of the new people who'd no history with the company and the customer, because it was a one customer company, literally set up just to service the company we all used to be in. They put something out in our internal newsletter that basically just said the old company was bad, everything they did, their processes were rubbish, nothing was good about the old company. We're here now to do it right. And we're all sat there going, well, hang on, we are the old company. We're doing nothing different to the same people we've always done it with. What do you mean it was all bad and wrong? If it was bad, we wouldn't be here. It'd be a different company.
Yeah.
And then a bit later, one of the company's core beliefs was you can make mistakes as long as you learn from them. Be prepared to take risks. Get out of your comfort zone. And if it doesn't work, just do something different. So that was the basis of the organisation, one of its core values. And suddenly, about 2 years in, we got an email out from the finance director saying, I'm sick and tired of so-and-so. The next time it happens, I'll name and shame the people who've done it. And just like you did then, raised eyebrows.
Whoa.
And coming a year on the back of getting insulted by one of the seniors, created a lot of dissatisfaction. And that's where I left the organisation.
Yeah.
I said, no, I'm not happy with this. It's not authentic and genuine as an organisation. So I got another job and jumped ship. And I was one of the rats deserting the ship because it lasted 5 or 6 years after, but only because that was the contract.
Yeah.
As soon as the 10-year contract was up, it didn't get renewed. And some people were integrated back into the old company, and some were sadly let go.
Would that, one of the things that I take from that is that it's not just, especially when we're looking at organizational changes that affect other people, right? When we're thinking about changes for our teams as well as ourselves, that there's the change itself, right? We're going to restructure in this way. And then there's the human element of the change, that is, how do you treat people through change? And that in and of itself is a different skill set as well, right? It's and just as necessary. So we need to understand that people are going through this Fisher change curve individually, and then we need to layer on support, empathy, communication, these things that we're talking about to make sure that they're going through it effectively and that they feel good about it. Otherwise, they could wind up disillusioned or hostile.
Very much so. And I suppose a couple of things. It's organizations don't change, people change. And John Harvey Jones, who was the head of ICI back in the last century, when it was the largest chemical manufacturing company in the world, when asked about change, and somebody said to him, how do you change ICI? And he said, one person at a time. That was really important, and that fits in with personal beliefs. I do as well, Brian. It's that finding the tipping point that then makes the change more common than not. But people change, and you've got to change the people. You can't organisationally change anything without bringing people on board with you.
Yeah, our chief operating officer put a slide up that had that on it the other day, because we were talking about, as a business, how do we continue to elevate, continue to evolve, perform at a higher level? And it's like, same thing, like organizations don't perform at a higher level, individuals perform at a higher level. So we need to train the individuals so that in any moment, that individual performs a little bit better. And then if all of our individuals are performing a little bit better, now the whole thing is performing better. So yeah, I love that.
There's a quote that's attributed to Richard Branson that I see regularly on LinkedIn. It says something like, question, what if the trainers and they leave? Answer, what if we don't and they stay?
Yeah.
And I just love that. It's the same concept for me. And you've got to invest in your people at an individual level and train them for their strengths, to maximise their strengths. And I'm not a fan of the word weakness, and I'm not a fan of training people to overcome weaknesses, because I'm weak in areas because I don't want to do them. So why force me to do them? Because I'll just leave. And it's that way. So maximise people's strengths. And manufacturing, certainly in the UK, and I would assume over there, have a statement around a distinction between make or buy, which is more effective, me to make this item or me to buy it in ready-made. And for me, it's the same concept. Is that our strength, or do we pay somebody where it's their strength?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's get back to the last off ramp here, because I looked down at the time and this is flying by. So let's talk about hostility. Again, is this internal hostility or external hostility, or both? Like, is this, we get to this point and we go, God, I hate myself and I'm just going to go crawl into a hole and go back to the way things were? Or is it also different? Like, I'm so mad at my organization, I'm going to turn this around and get mad at other people. Like, if I'm trying to get sober, I'm going to get so mad at the world and they don't understand me, and that kind of a thing, like that lashing out kind of a thing. Yeah. Is it one or both of those?
It's sort of both of those plus a little bit. And I use the word hostility from a Kelly perspective, which is about constantly doing something that you know doesn't work and trying to prove it will work. So it's quite a complicated but relatively simple, maybe, top-level view. So people who marry 5 or 6 times the same type of person, hoping that this time they're different, and pretend not to be because they're just repeating the same mistakes that they've always made. And so it's that concept of trying to force other people to conform with something that's already failed. And it's going all out. It's being angry at them, yes, because you're trying to persuade them, so you're angry, you get mad, emotional. It's getting mad at the organisation. And if we think about it, this comes down not far after we're angry at ourselves. So it adds on another layer of anger at ourselves. So not being able to educate those idiots that are not listening to us. And a lovely quote I use a few times across a wide range. And it's, remember, when you're arguing with an idiot, so are they. Some of those interactions we have that just don't work because we're trying to force something to fit where it doesn't fit.
That is, you might be the best quote king that I've interviewed. You just come out with a bunch of them, but I think that one is my favorite.
Yeah, I love that one.
When you're arguing with an idiot, so are they.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so true.
It's brilliant. I do love a good quote.
Yes. You said that and it hit me so hard. I immediately just thought back of like anybody I've been arguing with that oh man, didn't I look like a jackass? Whoops. That's great. Sorry. That really struck me.
Yeah. No, it's a brilliant quote. I just wish I knew who said it.
Yeah.
I'd give them credit.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you credit from here on out. One more question about hostility. Like, if we're in an organization and we're going through change and they kind of get through the disillusionment and they've not quit yet, but they start to get hostile about this. Yeah. Is this where you get those actively disengaged, like people who are trying to sabotage the process?
Very much so.
They are trying to maybe turn other employees against the process. Is this?
I think one example, back in the days, in the 90s, I was a project manager and we had a major problem in a line, really, that had lots of people engaged in it, in both office work as well as shop floor work. So held a little bit of a business process re-engineering meeting to look at the process, the structure, to go through to find out where it was going wrong. And got round to somebody, and it was a case of, so you get this information, what do you do with it? Well, I put it into this filing cabinet. And then what happens to it? Nothing. Nobody looks in there at all. It's not used anymore. So why are you putting it in there? Well, that's what I've been told to do. Yeah, but if it doesn't work, why are you putting it in there? And that was a fascinating sort of example of where people were being hostile rather than thinking, owning and becoming the solution. They just said, other people's problem. I'm doing what I've been told to do. I don't not bothered that it's not right and doesn't work. That's their fault for telling me I'm doing it. So that was an interesting meeting.
Yeah. Well, John, is there anything we have not covered on this change curve?
Loads of, no, not on the change curve. I'm just thinking about life, the universe, and everything that was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, barely sneezed at that. But as far as the change curve, just was curious if there was anything else that you thought was really important that we hadn't covered yet.
Maybe just throw one thing in that somebody came back to me 15, 20 years ago and said, John, I think there's another stage there that links the beginning and the end of the curve. It's called complacency, where you've gone through the change and you're now in a steady state of it working. So you get complacent then, and you sort of almost don't remember how emotionally upheaval there was at the start of the change, because you're now through it and you sort of dismiss the past, put it into context and filed it away. So that's the only other things. At least one person does talk about complacency as an outcome at the end.
Got it. Look, my last question here is, how can we use this in our day-to-day lives, managing so many changes at one time, right? I'm trying to implement a new system at work. I am trying to change a behavior at home so my wife and I don't fight as much. My kids are in a new stage and I'm trying to adapt to that. My car just broke down or I have a flat tire. Like there's all these changes that you have to make day to day, minute to minute. Plans change, everything changes. So should people think about organizing and using this? Like when should they use it and how should they think about it?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is a piece of string. How long is a piece of string as a question? Because it's a really fundamental question that goes back maybe to how to change an organization one person at a time. So it's almost focus on the one that's the highest priority at that moment in time. Focus on the one that will give you the most pain. Focus on them one at a time to then do bits for each of them and to look at where you're going with each of them. Because one of the problems I think that leads us into more of a mental health territory is we don't manage all of the plates. We've got to keep spinning and we try to manage them all rather than managing the ones that are the most powerful, the ones that are the most pain, whatever category we use, and then look to get that done. The analogy, how do you eat an elephant? The answer is one bite at a time. So do the ones that you can do, maybe some low-hanging fruit, and focus on the things that are pertinent right there and then. What are the ones? If you're at home, forget about trying to change people at work. Focus on the home one. If you're with your wife, then it's focus on that. If you're with the kids, it's focus on that. Sometimes when you get home, you'll find your wife's mad at you because of the kids. So it's then trying to navigate that crocodile-infested river and choose which ones. If they've been sent to the room, then at least you've got the venting person in front of you, as it were. So it's about narrowing down the focus. Focus on what you can change, what can you control, what can you influence at this moment in time, and leave the rest till you're in the environment that you can.
Fantastic. Well, John, this has been wonderful. To everybody who is listening, I mean, this was a masterclass. I hope you will all look at the curve, think through the changes you have in your life or the changes you're trying to lead at work. And there is a ton on here that can be applied to so many different parts of life. So, John, very appreciative. A lot of gratitude for you coming on today. Thank you very much for the work you're doing and sharing it here.
Thank you very much, O'Brien. And thank you for having me on. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and chat and enjoyed being put on the spot with one or two questions I'd not thought about.
I love that. That's a win for me. Anytime I can ask a question that hasn't been asked before, that's a win for me. So thank you, everybody out there. Best of luck with all the changes in your life. Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.